Welcome to Network Conversations, brought to you by the National Network of Youth Ministries. In this episode, Joe Maldonado, Central Florida Regional Coordinator with First Priority, shares his insights and wisdom for our discussion on collaboration. So let's join the conversation.
Well, it's great to have you guys on here. I just got off the road after 2 weeks, so my voice is a little bit crazy, but we're gonna give it a shot. I am so honored and privileged to have Joe Maldonado as our guest on Network Conversations. Joe has been in youth ministry in the local church for 31 years. And then in the summer of 2019, stepped away from the local church to join First Priority on the coast of Florida. He's got a son who's going to graduate from high school or has. And I'm excited about an open house because Joe's in my backyard and I'll definitely be there. And a daughter that's going into 8th grade. He started in Tennessee bivocationally, which was one of the things we've been trying to figure out is how do we reach out to those bivocational youth pastors that are doing it part-time. And then he spent 10 years in Indiana and 14 years at a church here in Indian River County. But since the summer of 2019, Joe has been killing it and just doing a great job of starting networks and collaborating. And so that's why he's our guest. And Joe, thanks for making the time for us. And thanks for being a part of this conversation.
Mark, thank you. I'm honored to be here.
We have at least 3 new people to Network Conversations that's on here. It's May, so we typically have more. So it's a little bit lighter this month, but hopefully it'll stir up some thoughts. And we're going to talk. And then we'll go into some breakout groups and hopefully learn from one another and not just from me and Joe. But Joe, so here's where I'd love to start. What's some basic steps that have worked? Like where would you start when it comes to the idea of collaborating and getting people to work together? Where would you say it starts?
Yeah, for me, I like to look where God's working and join in, right? And so it seems like in every city, every community in Tennessee, it was like I'm out of the gate as a new youth pastor and, got opportunities to find that one guy in the community. And we started having a few lunches and then we began to network, got to Indiana. And so I'm going to share this. The name of the group in Indiana that I walked into was MAMI, Minister of Madison Area Youth. And at first I'm like, oh my Lord, what did I step into, right? And but that was the Youth Ministry Network, and it was a phenomenal network. They were strong. And so I had the privilege of doing that. And then when I got to Indian River, again, instead of trying to recreate the wheel, Campus Life had a large network here in Indian River County. And then as they kind of dissolved out about 11 years ago or so, I picked that up and just kind of ran with it.
So there's a lot of things I want to make sure that I don't miss, but one of the things that's happened is that we've expanded networks up the East Coast and in a really big way. And Joe, you've been on the front lines of that. So you go into a new community like Titusville, Cocoa Beach. What do you do when you get there, when you think about collaborating, especially in some ways as an outsider? But you're kind of coming there and like, where does it start? Or where did it start?
Well, it started with me just saying, all right, God, we're stepping into a place where First Priority is not known. And so when we stepped onto the Space Coast, and so First Priority in South Florida, we're from the tip of Miami now to Titusville, which is about 260 miles of territory that we cover on the East Coast. And so when we stepped into the Space Coast, the blueprint there was really FCA, and FCA had a 20-year, just strong relationship with the churches. They had about 110 huddles across all these campuses. And so I kind of stepped into a world that was like nobody had heard of First Priority. We're brand new. And so again, I'll take Titusville Cocoa. I stepped into Park Avenue Church, one of the largest churches in the community, introduced myself. And, really was about developing relationships. And so Pastor Jonathan Gibson, one of the first pastors out of the gate, and I just began to encourage him, love on him, talk about what we're doing in campus ministry. And then from there, it was just, church after church, just having that conversation. First Baptist Church in the Atlantic, Beachside's very different. So the Space Coast is about 70 miles deep. So we knew we weren't going to get people traveling 60 miles to go to a network. And so we kind of identified 3 areas. And in each of those communities, as relationships were developed, and one of the talking points, Mark, was I wanted to find, looking where God's working, has there been any networks? So there was no networks, which surprised me because it's a very developed community, right? So there's no networks, but there have been pockets of things that had happened with youth pastors. And so what I'd found is when I got to Jonathan, we get together with a couple of youth pastors 2 or 3 times a year. Okay, great, awesome, man. Well, listen, and this was my fuel, and I loved it. Hey, look, I'm aligned with the National Network of Youth Ministries, and I'd love to talk to you how we could bring just some fuel to the table, some support, and help bring this network back to fruition and support you along the way. Yeah, man, I'd love to talk about that. When we got Beachside, or a group of guys, Anthony there, they had a large ministry, and the conversation began the same thing. Then First Baptist Church in the Atlantic, they're like, hey, our facility is yours, right? And so in all of our areas that we developed, it was really creating that relationship with that youth pastor, right? And then just saying, hey, they've been already doing something, and then how can we just bring the support behind to them to help them move forward.
Joe, you said something there that's real interesting, because you went in and you realized that FCA was the only parachurch ministry that was really doing it. But rather than going in and competing with FCA, you built a relationship with FCA and found out ways to collaborate and work together. Talk just a tiny bit about that, because that oftentimes when we go into a community, we feel like we're competing against other people, but you didn't do that.
Yeah, it's huge, and God is kind of catapulting us. It's the catalyst of us moving forward right now. Actually, Jason Shack, who is the director, and they have about 15 on their team on the Space Coast, he actually ghosted me for the first couple of months. And I thought, oh man, this guy's not going to return. I've stepped into his territory. He's going to look at it and say, why is another guy hitting all of my schools? But actually what he was doing, he was really researching and looking at us. And when Jason and I finally connected around the first of the year, he sat down and this was his vernacular, right? He said, Joe, we've been praying for a couple of years because we know we're not in the right space. It's not our lane. He said, FCA, we're the right model for coaches. We're the right model for athletes. We're the right model for sports teams, but we're not really good at the campus club. And we've been praying for a couple of years that God would send someone to us. Now, and I heard him say this in front of his team because I sat with him in a couple of meetings. We didn't necessarily say that it would be someone on the FCA side. So they welcome first priority. So Jason and I, just with common hearts to move forward, have kind of come together, and we have said, hey, how can we be stronger together, 2 organizations? So here's what Jason's done. We've just piloted multiple high schools to where they have said, had an FCA huddle there. We have hybrid that now to a first priority club. And the game plan is to take all 30 of those FCA huddles and turn those into first party clubs. And then we're strategically working on a gameplay, just to use their vernacular, right? To say that we want to saturate the campus for Jesus. And so first party is going to be the campus club. We're going to be administration, working with teachers. They're going to be coaches, students, athletics, working with teachers. We're going to cross hybrid everything. We're going to promote out of our Connect Week, pointing athletes to them. They're going to encourage athletes during lunches and breakfast times to come to our clubs. And so now we're not just walking to a church saying, hey, I'm First Party, which I am, right? But now we're walking to church saying, hey, First Party and FCA's teamed up. Will you partner with us? And so we're walking together to do this.
That's so exciting, man. So here's what I hear is, first of all, identify the need. What's the need in that community? Where have they been? Where are they?
Right.
And then after you've identified the need, then how do you give the ownership away, or do you keep the ownership? What does that look like?
Yeah, well, right now we have 5 networks, right? So there's no way I can keep the ownership. I knew that out of the gate. I loved Indian River County, but even if we expand to North County now. And so what I have done is when I've met these, when I call them champions, right? Some of these guys, or most of these guys, have all been veteran youth pastors in the community. And so as I've met these, I've asked them if they would take the lead. And I, along now with FCA, because I've asked FCA to come to the dance in NYM. So I brought all of this power, resource of support and said, we will give you everything you need to have a good annual structured year. Here are your dates. Here's your literature. Here's your talking points. Here are things that we're bringing to the table from outside organizations like Orange or, On Track Devotion, so on and so forth. And then if you'll just lead it. And so, no, it's so important. We want to give it all away. And so we have Pastor Jonathan Gibson, Pastor Jonathan Key, and, Pastor Rick Anthony. We just want to find those youth pastors and say, you take it. We're kind of the private back end support. And then I try to be at as many of those I can be at, but sometimes I can't.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's good. So identify the need, and then give away the ownership, and then kind of wrapping up here. What's the next, because obviously networks fall apart. So what does it look like going forward and collaborating?
It's consistency. What I found was, especially on the Space Coast, what I found was they had great intentions as youth pastors to move forward, but they got busy. A couple of months fell off, and then they just stepped back into a normal routine. And so what I think we're able to do, and again, First Party has a big platform where say we want to love on youth pastors and we want to network with them. It's important. But I think what we're able to bring to the table is we'll keep everything structured. We'll give them the dates. They don't have to think about it. We'll give them the resources. They don't have to think about it. So they're not really planning. I'm doing the behind the scene planning. And then I'm just kind of pressing them forward. And I'll tell you what happened. So Jonathan Gibson, Titusville, we just had in our April meeting, he was like, man, I'm out of town and I'm going to have my intern there. And I'm like, hey, that's cool. I'll come and I'll be part of that lead. FCA is going to be there. Mark, you, of course, we're out of town. But the beautiful thing is this, they're now not looking just to cancel the meeting. They're just like, hey, I'm out of town. Will you take it? And so we just have the pieces of the puzzle to fill the gap when they're out of town. So now there's consistency. So Mark, the big word here is consistency.
Yeah.
And once a community sees it month after month after month, then others are going to join in because they hear about it and they know, oh, that they meet every month. So it's a little bit getting off the ground, but once we get off the ground, it'll be strong.
That's so good, Joe. I mean, so exciting what God's doing and how it's working. We could, a lot of thoughts of so as we go into breakout groups, the idea of identifying the need, maybe in your community, this is how you went about identifying the need. And so that may be the place where you want to land, or what's it like for you when you try to give away ownership, and how does that work? And then consistency. It looks like, Joe, you do a lot of the setting up the meetings. Does that work for you? Does something else work for you? So I think that Phil's going to send us into some breakout rooms, and then we'll come back and kind of figure out what we've learned from each other. Thanks, Joe. Thanks a ton. Man.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for all you're doing to build networks.
Feel free to pause the video here and think through these questions yourself, or with the group that you're viewing this with. When you're ready, unpause to hear more of the conversation and the takeaways from the youth workers that joined us live.
You got it, Mark.
Hey, so what did you learn? What did you talk about? You know, where did you go with conversations in your small groups? What can we learn from each other in a big group?
Well, Mark, I'd jump in and I'd give kudos to guys like Doug, and we talked about how, you know, collaboration takes trust, and trust takes time. And when you endure and you hang out there in your community for a while, you can build trust with organizations, the community, and schools, and that stuff just can't happen overnight unless it's miraculous, I guess. But just value of being there and hanging in and sinking roots someplace.
Yeah, that's interesting. Just reflecting on Joe, you know, he was in Indian River County for 14, 15 years before he went to First Priority. So he's got huge levels of trust in Indian River County, but going into a new place, you got to find those people who everybody trusts. So that's good. Anybody else?
Yeah, Doug, for you, what is it? What has been the thing that's kept collaboration going so well?
These guys just asked me that. I think, well, when I got here in 1984, does anybody know when National Network of Youth Ministry started?
81.
Okay. I don't know that our network here knew about National Network of Youth Ministries at that time, but they had already been in play for at least 2 or 3 years before I arrived in 84. So that has, and I got there and I told our little small group, I already saw at the table Young Life, and I believe FCA was on board still at that time, and Catholic and Protestant churches. So I had a great model for me already set up of collaboration and what that meant. And it was a very active network already doing some things in the community. And then we are, geographically speaking, if you look on the map, it's easy to draw a circle around exactly where our network goes, from Carpinteria through Santa Barbara to Goleta. I don't have to think, I don't think about it in the same way I would in the metropolitan area. Well, do we include that other town in here? So that's really helped too.
Yeah, I imagine that when people come to Santa Barbara, they immediately know there's a youth ministry network, and it's almost like an expectation now that you just are a part of it.
Right. And yeah, thanks for saying that, Mark. And we've got a lot of our people primed to keep their eyes out all the time when they hear of a new person who rolls into town. They've been great about emailing me or texting me or whatever, say, hey, I just found out about this new person, get them on the list. So that's great.
Other conversations?
Kyle, what about for you is working great for collaboration?
For me, just working together. You know, it's hard. It's hard by yourself, and just getting together with others and championing them, encouraging them. I said in our group, I like to use the phrase "putting people in a winning situation," where I'm just, you know, someone needs a task, I try to make sure it's something they can. It's not above their talents, and, you know, yet doesn't mean I can't push them down the road, but try to give them some wins with what they're doing. That way they're encouraged and want to come back and continue to work. I'm just excited to gather with other people in ministry and see what they're doing, hear their wins, hear what hasn't worked, and learn and grow and give God all the glory.
That's awesome. Steve was in our group, Steve and Joe and I, and Steve has started a ministry called Merge that was already going in Pasco County, but is trying to get 9 different areas in Tampa Bay, youth pastors in smaller churches, as well as larger churches together. And so maybe, Steve, you could share a little bit about things you're doing to initiate like conversations and to kind of make some connections. Some of the things you shared with me and Joe.
You said in addition to what was shared with you and Joe?
Well, no, just with the larger group of like, what does it look like for you identifying the need and getting some of that going in that area, because you're right on the ground floor of what could be, you know, and what is, but what also could be. When I think about what Doug's done for all those years in Santa Barbara, you're starting where Doug started a few years ago.
Right. Yeah. So just real quick, what we do is we host rallies. We get a lot of youth groups together to work together on hosting kind of a local youth rally. And so a lot of what I'm doing is just working with the youth pastors and looking for what the needs are of the youth pastors to kind of support them. So I think that's a little bit going from in our conversation there. And so how that plays out so far is, from my own experience and from talking to a lot of other youth pastors, especially post-COVID, they've taken a little bit of a hit. There's not the same numbers and everything. And then also they're, also focusing a lot of time on family and work outside of ministry and all those sorts of things. So a lot of the way that we set things up is to kind of make it easier on the youth pastors and a little bit easier for them to engage with our ministry, be involved with helping make sure that the rallies happen, while at the same time, kind of like what Joe had already said, doing the things where they don't have to think about it, and freeing up some of the mental space. So that's some of where I'm looking at needs. And then kind of what you already said about see what's working, where God is doing something, and then joining in. I think that's kind of something that we're doing too. And I'm sitting down with pastors and youth pastors who have been in the area for a long time. They know who to network with. They've already got some connections, and then sharing a gospel-centered mission with them. And it seems like things have been opening up pretty well for us from there.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, all you Florida people, could some of you move to Utah? We could really use you.
Hopefully this has been helpful. It's great to have Todd Parridge on here, because I'm jumping the gun a little bit, Kevin, but Todd is going to be our next guest for our next network conversation. And it's really, help me if I get it wrong, but broken youth pastors, because Todd, that's where he's living, man, is he's working with a lot of those guys and gals that are just hurting and going through a tough situation. And he's doing a lot of what a lot of us are doing, is being a shepherd to the shepherds. And so Todd, it's great that you're on here, and thanks for jumping on, but we're looking forward to that conversation. And is there like if you were to nail it down today, just a takeaway to say, hey, this is the one thing that I would take away from this conversation, either pop it in the chat room if that's more comfortable, or speak it out. But this is the takeaway for me. And I'll just say, and it's been my takeaway probably since January, but identifying the need, like going in and listening. God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. And so when Joe talked about understanding what was already going on in the community before coming in with an agenda, it was just a reminder that it's so easy to go in like with this plan rather than really being sensitive to what's already happening. So that was a big takeaway for me.
I think just the priority of being relentless and continuing to build relationships and nurture those. No matter how long you've been somewhere or short you've been somewhere, just to, who are 1 or 2 people a month or a week or whatever that you could reach out to, or church, and just find out, do they have a youth leader? Mm-hmm. Constantly asking those questions and not giving up on that, even if it's not bearing as much fruit as you'd like.
So good. Yeah, I love that, Steve. Look for what God's doing. Join him.
What about you, Isaac? What are you thinking?
For me, mine would be consistency. When you first get started with a network, or in a new place, people don't necessarily know who you are, or they might think you have an agenda or whatever. But if you can be consistent and find a day or time that works for most, and stick on that and continue to remind people and invite people, whether it's one person who shows up or no one who shows up, or 10 people who show up, just to be consistent, always offer it. And that's huge. I think the other thing I was thinking about sharing was, sometimes people don't want to get into a network because they just don't know you yet or don't necessarily trust you. But sometimes it's easier if there's an event you're putting on and you're inviting them to come to the event or bring their students to an event, that they'll actually participate in the meetings, and because they want the information for their group. And then it's through the meeting to plan that event where you can build the trust and build the connection, and then invite them to the network. So you might have to reverse it a little bit, which is kind of weird, but it works.
No, that's really good.
Good.
I think sometimes it works both ways. Sometimes you got to build the relationship to get them to the event. Sometimes the event, yeah, it's so good.
There were two different networks I was in where we had a standing rule. New youth pastor got their lunch paid for. And there were like three of us that were like, whose turn is it? Me, you, or like there was two other guys. And it was really fun to treat that, that youth worker is new in town or their first time coming to a meal. But when we would, we'd find somebody new or whatever, we'd reach out and be like, hey, if you come, like, your first one's on me. So that was just kind of one of those things, but that stood out for me, that I was, somebody treated my lunch the first time I came, and really kind of helps break the ice.
That's good.
That's really good.
And if they leave us, they should have to pay for everybody's lunch.
That's awesome.
Excellent.
That's
Jeff,
great.
any thoughts?
I think all the comments everybody had was great. Building trust, consistency, building relationships. Sometimes it's one-on-one. A lot of times for me, it's one-on-one. I think caring about people outside of ministry and that they know you care about them as a person, not as a whatever they bring, but as a person. I think growing leaders, praying for leaders, over and over and over, just grinding it out. That's our ministry. That's our calling, to do that kind of thing.
That's really good.
Mm-hmm. And I heard you talk, Jeff, in the small group about developing leaders, how vital and important leadership development is in our ministry, in our collaboration, that the more we're developing leaders, the more they'll be able to collaborate with one another.
Yeah, I tell people, if your ministry's, if you're the only one who can do something, you'll be the only one doing it, and your ministry can only get so big. But if your ministry is about equipping other people, not executing ministry, but equipping others, then your ministry is unlimited, because it's not dependent on you. And then it eliminates stress. I don't have to be here. Somebody else is there. I don't have to do this thing because somebody else is doing it. It eliminates stress. And then it models for them how to have ministry, of how they can grow their ministry even bigger, even beyond themselves. And so I think building leaders, that's our ministry as well.
It's kind of biblical too, equipping the saints to do the work of ministry.
Yeah. Well, you think about it. I mean, Jesus had 12 and only 3 maybe close.
Yeah.
He changed the world. And so we don't have to know hundreds of people. I mean, he definitely spoke to the masses, but a lot of his ministry was just with a handful.
Yeah, that's good.
It wasn't a hurried ministry. It wasn't hectic. It was a very leisurely, I don't know if that's the right word to use, but it wasn't a hectic pace. He was interested in people and grew his ministry like that.
Awesome. Well, appreciate you, Jeff. Thank you for that. And I appreciate all of you Joe, amazing job. I have so much that I need to take back to my local network here and apply and work on. And one thing I want to end on the idea is your next conversation. We've got some things coming up that you can be a part of. And one thing we always have going called free refills. We'll be sending a follow-up email with each of these things. But Free Refills is a podcast that deals with the soul of the youth leader, kind of a way that you can help fill some of those leaders that you're working with something that they can take whenever they want to. The other idea that we have coming up is, and Mark already made the plug for our next network conversations, having Todd Peerage talking about broken leaders. We've been there. Sometimes that's who we are. Those are the ones that we're dealing with. And as we encourage broken leaders, they're better able to deal with broken students. So that is going to be June 14th. Yet again, on our follow-up, that will we'll give you that information. And we're also having something called a Network Leaders Training on May 26th. It's to help encourage and give the DNA to be a network leader. If you've got other leaders that you want to encourage to be a part of the team, this is an excellent event for them to be a part of. Or if you just want to refresh yourself, May 26th on noon Pacific. That is, again, in the follow-up email, all that information will be there. And along those lines, I would just love to have, before we close up, Joe pray for us all so that we can be the leaders God intends us to be. So Joe, do you mind doing that? And then I'll wrap up quick after that.
Absolutely. Let's pray. So Father, we love you and thank you for first loving us. And God, we get an opportunity to make an impact in our community, and especially those men and women, God, that are serving in roles that many of us have served in. And so we want to say thank you. And we know the facts that, God, we are better together. So God, as we think about those that are serving in the local church as volunteers, full-time, part-time, want to be just stepping out of college, all of those, God, just thank you for allowing us to bring those people together in community. God, equipping them with the tools and the encouragement needed, God, for this day and tomorrow. Thank you for today, God. And I pray, God, that you'll continue to open doors for all of us. And that, God, that you'll make a way and continue to expand our territories so that the good news of your Son will continue to go forward. And so we love you and thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thanks for viewing this network conversation, brought to you by the National Network of Youth Ministries. We hope it helps you to set the table for unity and further conversations with other youth leaders. Any shared links are in the comment section on NNYM's YouTube channel. While you're there, feel free to like and subscribe. If you want to join our next conversation or training, you can find upcoming live events on our Eventbrite page. You can also connect to a local network leader at nnym.org. We're here because we are better together.